Ready? I'm ready. We're live. All right. Okay, guys and gals, if you have your phones, go ahead and share today's post. Oh, I heard myself up there. Let's see. All right. Hello to everyone online. Okay, so before we get started, does anybody have any prayer requests? Dee Dee is, she flew out at 4 today from Louisville for Houston, so they should be not quite there yet, but they should be there soon. So just remember them. Yeah, so they're all going down there, correct? Is Barb going with them? So all 5 of them are going. Okay. So just remember the whole family. The boys have never flown before, so pray that went smoothly for them. So, anybody else? Remember Leah's mamaw? She's been having a real hard time in the hospital in the last couple of days, just real down, and she needs prayers. And so does Kathy. For those that don't know, without going into any lot of details, Don went to Texas, Oklahoma to do some work with Jason. And ended up having to go to the hospital while he's down there. And he's still in the hospital right now. He's doing okay. And hopefully we'll get out tomorrow. Don, yeah. So I keep it at that. And I don't think he wants a lot of people to know, even though I just put it on the internet. But he's doing okay. He's doing okay. He's eating ice cream today. He sent us a picture of him eating ice cream. So he's doing all right. But just remember him. And Kathy, I think Kathy's kind of like frazzled right now with her mom in the hospital and Don in the hospital. And, so just remember them in your prayers. Anybody else? He's probably going to kill me because he's probably watching this right now. But well, this is true. Anybody else got any prayer requests? We're good? Any unspoken prayer requests? Several. All right. Mac, will you open us up with the word of prayer? Amen. All right. So due to a request from last time when I had a cup of ice and water without a top, I didn't realize I was chomping ice with my headphones on. So I was instructed about that later on that night. So I made sure I've got a straw on the lid today. All right. So we are in Esther, chapter 8. So before we dive into this part, I want to talk real quickly just about the fingerprints of God that have been all over this story up to this point. Because remember, we talked about last week that this is the only book in the Bible that doesn't actually mention God, doesn't say God ever. Okay, and yet He is clearly working throughout it. So just to ask you all, just kind of like teacher and me, what are some things that you've noticed in here that was like, oh, God was in the mix? What's some things that have happened that you're like, yeah, that had to have been God? So 3 days of fasting and praying. So we know, who else were they who were they praying to, right? And they were seeking Him for His advice, for His will. And we see after that is when it's just like door open, door open, door open, door open, right? So what are some specific things that happened that was like, man, God was making a way?
She went to Him without His permission.
Right. Right, Esther went into his chambers, went to his chambers without being summoned, which could result in death, right? So she trusted that God would take care of that. Well, something else?
Are you talking about just after the fast?
No, just in general, the whole story, like how God made a way in this. Absolutely, yeah. Mordecai being at the right place to hear that plot to kill Xerxes, right? That set the stage for Esther to be trusted by him, and then in doing so, Mordecai to be trusted because she said he's the one that told you or told me. Yeah, Candy.
When
Right, that the king couldn't sleep that night, and it just so happened he couldn't sleep that night, right? And he has that person read him from his annals, from his registry, and he finds out that Mordecai is the one who did this, and he never honored him before, right? And what else? What are some other fingerprints in this? Yes, Mr. Paul, raise your hand.
It echoes from the very beginning the fact that Esther is born and she's a Jew, right? And the very fact that she's born and she is so beautiful and she is so desirable that the king, many years later, decides he's going to pick her over any other.
Right.
Now I understand that he doesn't know, but she was made special from the very beginning, so it echoes even to Christ in the very beginning of the story all the way through.
Right, absolutely. That she, from the very beginning of her birth, God already knew that she was going to be the one, that she was going to be the beautiful one that he would pick, right? How about the fact that she didn't tell him what she wanted the first night, right? Because that allowed the scenario to take place where he would remember about Mordecai, that Haman would come up with the plan to really point out Mordecai, and then Haman would show up the next day and be like, thinking that he was going to, it's almost the exact opposite of like King David and Nathan, right? And when Nathan tells King David the story, and King David's like, that man should be killed, and he's like, that man is you, and yet in this story here we have Haman's like, he's going to honor me, this is what I want, and he's like, actually, I want you to go do that to Mordecai, your mortal enemy, right? So God was working this out this whole time. So, right, and I was looking this up because some, Darren, what did yours say? Darren, didn't yours say something besides like that that he wasn't hung, that he was impaled? That he was impaled. So there's a discussion to be had as to what the gallows actually were. Were they hung on spikes, or were they hung like with a noose? There's a discussion to be had there as to whichever ones. I mean, neither are great, And we're going to find out here in a minute that the sons actually get it worse than the father, like they get it double, right? And which is terrible. Okay, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. All right, so let's see if anybody's joining us online. All right, we got a few watching with us. All right, okay, so let's go ahead and get into chapter 8. And what I want to point out is that some of us probably could have felt like at the end of chapter 7 it was good. Like Haman was dead, they told the king what was going on, but it's not done yet, right? And I want to point out something as we go through this, that Xerxes never rescinds the order. He never rescinds the decree to kill all the Jews, right? And so I want you to catch that knowledge. Remember, Xerxes is not a Christian. He's not a worshiper of God. He thinks he is a god, right? And so he is not going to bow down to that at all. And so he's not our example, but we know that God can use anyone to accomplish his purposes, okay? All right, so chapter 8. So it says, Haman has just been killed on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai, and the king is no longer upset. So it's verse 1 of chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. All right, so now Esther has his estate. Everything that was his is now hers. Okay, and this is like insult to injury right here. Okay, it says, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So this is the first time that, because she's mentioned Mordecai to the king at least twice. And now she's like, oh, by the way, he's my cousin. He raised me, And so she tells him who he is, and the king takes off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Right? Yeah, it's like, wah, wah, wah. So not only does he get his in the end, but now Mordecai gets his in the end, right? And so that's something for us to remember about God, that even when we don't see how this is going to work out, he's going to work it out in a far greater way than we could ever imagine, right? It doesn't always mean we're going to get the monetary things, but it's like the things that we think are impossible, they're not impossible for God, right? And so we find that she is now appointed over this, and he's now in charge of the estate, right? So it says, Esther again pleads with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, Now, which I think is really interesting here, because, like, clearly he favors her. Clearly. But notice she's not assuming anything, because she also knows that, like, he could turn like that. She could be Vashti just like this, right? And so she says, if it pleases you and thinks it's the right thing to do, if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? You know, if this was a movie, I know I keep saying that, but I just really want it to happen. But if this was a movie, most of us would think that when Haman dies, so does the decree. You know what I mean? But Haman didn't do the decree in his own name. He did it in Xerxes' name with Xerxes' ring. And Xerxes is still in charge, right? And so it's interesting because we think, well, surely he could just call it off. Like he could just end it, right? But he's going to tell us something right here. He says, King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. Right? So he's saying, I can't change this. What? He is the king, but he's playing by his own rules. He's like, I can't change this. Okay? But what you can do is you can write your own rule. Mordecai now, right? Haman wrote the first one. He has the ring. So Mordecai can write one to counter. You know, so he can't write one that says, don't kill the Jews, right? Because that would be contrary to the first one. So what he does, I find, is really interesting. And see, I think sometimes we want to ask God to just take away the enemy, take away the hardship, take away the problem. But maybe these are the declarations we need to start saying. So look at what happens with Mordecai right here. Okay? And I think this is important because, like I said, we may have thought this should have been over after Haman dies, but it's so important that we don't stop until God is done. Right? Because she could have been like, okay, we're good now. Surely this won't happen. But it still would have gone on. Right? It still would have gone on and the Jews would have been attacked and killed. And so we can't stop until we know God is done doing what he's doing. Right? And so she still goes after, because remember, she got rid of Haman, but she still not got the second half of her plea to Xerxes in chapter 7 or 6, that save my people. Save my people. She still had not got that yet, so she was seeking it. And so he says, at once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province in the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The king's, and this is, so here we are, right? So he's sent out this edict, and we still don't know yet what it is, right? But we just know that. Can you take these out of a little bit out of the mains? They're echoing. So we still don't know what his edict is. But we know it has to be something that's going to enable the Jews to get out of this predicament that they're in, right? But it doesn't really. It doesn't really get them out of it. It just enables them to endure it. Like, that's the key. And so he says here in verse 11, the king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. Okay, so why is that important? Because remember, all these provinces are under rule of Xerxes and the Persian government. Okay? And so if there was another people group that would assemble an army together within their city limits, that would have been an act of war, basically, against the kingdom. So nobody had the right to do that. You know what I'm saying? And so Mordecai writes this rule that they have the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Right? This is what Mordecai is writing out to the Jews. Okay? The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. And so you think about it, so what has he done? Basically said, all right, now you can fight. Now you can fight. You're no longer sitting ducks. You can fight for yourselves. And this is huge, right? Because they are now realize, hey, we're not just sitting ducks anymore, right? And so we know that in our country right now, there's a lot of issues over gun violence and things like that. And what we oftentimes see is that people attack places where guns are illegal. People can't carry guns because they know there's going to be no interference, that they can just do what they want to do. And yet, when there's people who have guns, and I'm not here to do any type of Second Amendment, whatever, but what we see is that people typically won't fight against people who know that they know can fight back. A bully's not going to go up and try to pick on the biggest guy at school. It's not what he's going to do. He's going to find the littlest, the weakest, the one who he thinks will not push back. And so what he's done now is he's now made it a fair fight that the Jews can now fight back. And what this does is amazing to me. It doesn't just like make them think, okay, well, maybe we can win. It like enthralls them. Like, okay, we are not going down. And so look what happens. Okay, it says, so that they set this edict out that it would happen on the same day as the edict before. Because remember, it's kind of like the purge. It's really strange. You know, if you've seen the purge is like one day out of the year, no crime. There's no crime at all. You can kill, steal, whatever, and it's fine, right? And so clearly it's not fine for those watching online. But so what happens is they've said, they made the edict, Haman made the edict on this same day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, kill all the Jews. That's what his edict was. And so now Mordecai says, okay, on the 13th day of the 12th month, all you Jews fight back. Like that's what he said, and you need to get ready for it. I think sometimes we need to recognize this preparation, because they knew they weren't getting out of the fight. People were going to come. And part of me wonders if that's what Haman was talking about. You remember when Haman promised Xerxes, I'll give you however many talents of money, like I'll give you all this money if you do this edict. And he's like, I don't want your money. I just wonder if because he was going to plunder all the Jews. Like they were going to be plundered. All their goods, all their monies were going to be taken. So I wonder if that's what he was going to pay with. You know, we don't know. We don't know. But so now they're going to be ready for this, okay? And so look what happens. It says this is verse 14. Verse 13, sorry. A copy of the text. What? Well, it's because you got a baby on your chest. All right, fair enough.
I think this is a strong tie into Revelation where they're not removed from the tribulation. They're actually empowered to withstand it.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And that's true. That oftentimes God doesn't take us out of hardship. He helps us endure hardship. He walks with us in hardship. He says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. He doesn't say, I'll just take you out of the hard stuff. He says, I'll walk with you in it, right? Think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What did they see when they looked in the fire? They saw one like the Son of Man walking with them in it, right? And I think that's a comforting thing for us to know that God is going to be with us in the midst of the hardship, right? And so, verse 13, it says, a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province, made known to the people of every nationality, so the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. Too often, guys, as Christians, we are not ready. We're not ready. We're not ready for the battle that's going on. We're not ready for the battle we haven't seen. We're not ready for the things that are coming our way. And we're shocked when they happen. And it's yet, Scripture's full of truth to help us prepare and be ready to give an answer for the hope for which we profess, to be ready to face hardship, to be ready to worship, to be ready to bow down, to be ready to stand up. Like, Scripture's full of it. But we have to be ready. And so that's what Mordecai was basically giving the Jews the opportunity to do, is be ready. Be ready for this. And so, verse 14, the couriers riding the royal horses raced out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa. Because remember, that's basically home base, right? Susa's where they're at, okay? And so it goes on to say, Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white. I hope those are the ones that Haman put on him. A large crown of gold and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. Which, doesn't that seem so strange? Like they've just been told, okay, now you're going to war. And they're like, all right. Like, but why? Because now it's not a certain death. Now it's not a certain death. And so they're excited. It says, in every province, verse 16, for the Jews it was a time of happiness, joy, gladness, and honor. Verse 17, in every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. You think about that. Because let's just be honest here for just a second, right? Becoming a Jew didn't mean that you were like, okay, I'm with you guys. Or I'm a Jew. Like, it was a commitment, fellas, right? You had to become a Jew. You had to be circumcised. That's what had to happen in order for you to become a proselyte Jew. In other words, you converted to Judaism. So you have men who are of whatever age that are so afraid of the Jews that they're like, we would rather do this and convert with you all and be part of you all than fight against you all. Right? And I think sometimes there's people that come to that conclusion with God too. I'd rather quit fighting against you, God, and you change my life. And we see this. So again, we're seeing all this stuff that's like foreshadowing of Christ. Because what does Christ do in our spirit? He removes the flesh. That's what he does. As we commit to him and become a Christian, he removes the flesh inside of us. So again, that's commitment. That's fear. Like truly, they're afraid that so much that they're going to convert to this side, right? And all that comes with it. So we see that all these things. Now, what does this do to the Jewish population? They just grew, right? Their army just got bigger, right? Fishes and loaves, right? You know, and so God has not only given them a chance to stand up, but He's also made them bigger than what they were. So this brings us to the moment, right? This is D-Day, so to speak, right? So on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. So there's still people, even though that edict went out to the same people who got the first edict, they were like, we'll still take them. We'll still get them, right? And it says the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. And is that not the case when it all said and done for God's people? That God's people will get the upper hand. That God's people will survive. And it says, the Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those seeking their destruction. No one could stand against them. And I do want to point out something. It doesn't seem to imply that the Jews ever sought out battle. They didn't go and try to find them and fight them. What they do? They were just ready. They were ready when the battles came. And I think that sometimes as Christians, we try to find the battles. We try to go out and seek out fights, when instead we're supposed to just take care of what's ours. And when the battles come, we're supposed to be ready for them. And that's something we can learn from this story. So he says, all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Man, things shifted quickly, didn't they? That all of a sudden now you've got the provincial nobles, the satraps, governors, and the king's own administrators are helping the Jews. Why? Because they're scared of Mordecai. Why are they scared of Mordecai? He's second in command. He's the one who called the order, right? So if they speak back against him, that's basically effectively defying the king because he's the one he put in charge. So now they're so scared and they're like, what do you want us to do? How can we help you? Right? And so again, God's fingerprints, right? Because now it's not just the Jews. It's basically the power of Xerxes behind them to fight back against these people, right? Again, God will use those that are not his followers to accomplish his purposes, right? And that's why it's so great when people, I mean, not great in that sense, but how God will work when someone's like, I hate God, and yet God can absolutely use that person to do what he needs to be done, right? And whether or not they know it or not. Just like you said, the king had no idea when he chose Esther that God had all this planned. And yet, even Mordecai was like, who knows? Who's not to say that God didn't put you here for such a time as this, you know? And so we have to walk in those. Now, one thing I will say about those nobles and all this, those who help the Jews, like, recognize, guys, that sometimes people do good things, but they're acting in their own self-interest. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're doing something that's good and moral, whatever, but they're not doing it for the sake of the morality or the goodness of it. They're doing it for their own self-interest, right? And we have to be careful of that. You know, motives matter. And so they're scared of him, and so let's look what happens. And says in Mordecai, verse 4, Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, so this is in the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Darren, do you want to read these names in verse 7? No. So it says, oh, this is going to be a battle right here. It says, they also killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Asphatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arsa, Aridae, they must have been twins, and Vaisatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. And I find that interesting. Like, they killed them, but they didn't take their stuff. Right? They killed them, but they didn't take their stuff. And so now, notice, all 10 sons are dead. Okay? So the sins of the father ended up falling on the children here. All right? But they're not done with them yet. Okay, so keep that in mind. So they're dead. They're already dead. And it says, the number of those slain in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted. I just want to know if he did this with any other woman. Because he's constantly like, what do you want? What can I do for you? Like, how can I help you? And she's just like, well. So she says, if it pleases the king, Esther answered, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. That's a statement. They're already dead, right? It's like, they're not dead enough. Like, I mean, because, yeah, that's the annihilation part, not just the destruction part. But I mean, but what does this tell us too? Because again, all of Old Testament testifies of Jesus, okay? And so when Jesus comes back, he's not just going to kill you, right? If you're a non-believer, right? He's going to destroy you, right? That's why he says that we should not fear those who can take our lives, but the one who can kill the body and soul in hell. And so here we have that them being dead is not just enough, but a statement is made here. That you will not go against the people of God. You will not defy God. You will not do this. You will not defy his plans. And so she asked him that. And notice, she wants the edict carried out one more day. One more day. So don't just let us defend ourselves today. Let us do it tomorrow too. And the people that hate us and want us to die, we'll take care of them tomorrow. And so the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they hanged the 10 sons of Haman. And again, whether that's with a noose or on a spike, I'm not sure. Either way, they're already dead, right? So we're making a statement here. It says, and the Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. So keep in mind, we got two storylines going on right here. We got the Jews in Susa, in the citadel, that they killed 500 on the 13th, and then they killed 300 on the 14th, right? Because she asked for the extra day. And then you have those who are, we call rural Jews, that are in the other provinces around. So 127 provinces, they killed 75,000 enemies that day, okay, just on the 13th, right? So they didn't do anything on the 14th, okay? And so it says, this happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy, okay? So all the rural Jews, their celebration was on the 14th, while those who were in the citadel, in the city, were still fighting, okay? And so they actually take a break on the 15th, right? So we have 2 days here that are going on. And so this is where we find it's what we say, Sammy, it's Purim. Purim is how this is pronounced, okay? Purim, right? Like Purim another, Purim, okay? But so Purim, the Jews in Susa, however, had assembled, like we said, on the 13th and 14th, okay? And they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy on the 15th day, right? So the day after it was done, they made a day of feasting, right? So it says, this is why the rural Jews, those living in the villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, because remember, they only fought on the 13th, the day of the edict. And so it says, they observe the 14th day of the month as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. That sounds eerily familiar to Revelation 21. He says, I will make all things new. Right? There will be no more crying, no more sorrow, no more pain. The former things have passed away. That when he takes us to be with him, there will be no more mourning. It will only be joy. There will be no more sorrow. It will only be peace. That, again, we see these foreshadowings of how God is going to deliver his people in the end. Right? We see it in this moment. And so it says, he wrote to them to observe the day of he wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun. I mean, I wonder why they continued it. I mean, he's like, do this and give each other presents and gifts and celebrate and feast. And they're like, well, I guess you twist our arm. And so they do this. And it said, they agreed to continue the celebration they begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the poor, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. That's how they decided on the day. If you remember, they cast the lot to see what day they would do this, right? And it fell on that day. Which is interesting because he cast a lot for that day. Mordecai chose that day. You know what I'm saying? Like, as people of God, if we wait, we can see what the enemy's doing. If we'll just wait. Okay? Sometimes we just need to be patient. And so he goes on and says, but when the plot came to the king's attention, so we just have a summary here, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore these days were called Purim, from the word poor. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never cease to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. And so this last little part of chapter 10 is about Mordecai, okay? So again, I think God is faithful to those God's faithful all the time, but when you're faithful to God, he's faithful to you. And so Mordecai took care of his cousin. He watched over her, stuck by her side as long as he could, was honest and faithful even when it would require his life. He challenged her to be more than what she thought she could be, to be faithful to God and to trust God even when she couldn't see it. And then in turn, he was honored and he was saved and he was exalted, which is exactly what God does for us, right? And so King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai to which the king had raised him, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. And I think that as we finish on that part right there, it's so important that we as Christians do the same thing. Like, we are Americans, but we are Christians first. Like, that's the kingdom we belong to, is the kingdom of God. And we have one family. We are citizens of a heavenly country, it says. And so before we start standing up for Americans, are we standing up for Christians? Like, because that's our kingdom. And I know that may seem kind of odd in our country, but like, America doesn't equal Christian. Like, those are not the same things. And so we've got to start saying, are we standing up for Christians? Are we standing up for believers? Are we standing up for the least of these like Christ told us to? Because he says that what we do to the least of these, we do to who? Him. And so that's what we see Mordecai was exalted for, is because he stood up for his people and for the welfare of the Jews. That's what he did. And so about Purim, okay, when we talk about this, Again, it's named after the lot that Haman cast to decide the day. Okay, I looked up a little bit about this today. They still do celebrate this today. This year, this coming year, so we've already passed it for 2022. 2023, it's the beginning of March 6th to the end of March 7th. Okay, is Purim. It can happen anytime between March and April, sometime in those 2 months, depending on the calendar. But they do have a minor fast before it starts. Why do you think that is? Because Esther's fasting, right? So they're doing it to commemorate her fasting, right? It is very much a party. Lots of food, alcohol. Like from what I read, it's like they don't want people to get like just blitzed, but like they definitely encourage drinking in this to celebrate. When they do this, they have a reading of the story, and I thought this was hilarious. Okay, so they read the Esther story, and in Esther's story, Haman's name is mentioned 54 times in the story. Okay, but I do want to pull up one passage, if you would. It's the only passage I had on here. It's Deuteronomy 25, verse 19. Deuteronomy 25, verse 19. And if you remember that Haman, his father was an Agagite, okay, and an Agagite was from the Amalekite group, okay, who hated the Jews. Now, this is Deuteronomy 25, verse 19. It says, when the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land he's given you to possess as an inheritance, you shall blot out the name from Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Okay, so Amalek, where the Amalekites come from, okay, in this passage says his name shall be blotted out from under heaven. In other words, you won't hear that name, okay? And so they take that, and then they have this story read of Esther, and every time they hear Haman's name, who is from the line of the Amalekites, they have these noisemakers that they'll either use these noisemakers, or they stomp their feet, or they yell, so that every time his name is read, you can't hear it. So it's like every year, it's almost like a taunting to Haman, like, we can't hear his name. We're going to cover it up. Like they never hear it. So I just found that to be just a humorous, like, little, I guess, tradition that they do. Now, they do give a lot of gifts of food to family and to the poor. They kind of present them almost like in Easter baskets, okay? And they give these out because that was one of the things they were commanded to do by Mordecai. They have carnivals, food, parades, all that stuff. I mean, it's a big deal for these 2 days that happens in Jerusalem, in Israel. So, all right. Thoughts about all of that? Yes?
I'm just wondering why Esther asked for a second day to continue on. Were there people hiding out, things to be rooted out, or did she know that, you know?
I don't know. I mean, I know Valerie said it last week that it could have just been like when in her 3 days of fasting, maybe that's what she got from God was wait. Yes.
I was just going to say, Edinburgh had also eat these little triangular pastries.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome good.
Made some.
Ready next year, go make me some pastries.
So if you didn't hear that, I saw those today, but they had this really long Jewish name that knew I was never going to remember. But so they're like these triangular pastries, and some say they're called Haman's ears. And there's another name for it because like they thought maybe it was a hat that they wore from that country or whatever. But there's like little triangles, and they eat them as like a commemoration of his destruction. But I swear I think they had like beets in them or something, and I was just like, nope. As you put some raspberries in there that look like beets, I'm in.
I made it similar for my little preschoolers.
We'll eat them if you make them. We'll give them a shot. Okay. So thoughts on Esther? It feels strange that we finished this book in 4 weeks, but just some thought. I mean, I just love the story, and I love the story. So, yeah, that's what Jackie asked. She's like, "Why'd you choose Esther to do this next one?" I was like, "Because I was wore out."
I don't believe that answer now. I think it was probably divine intervention.
Well, God, yeah, there you go, fingerprints, right? So, any thoughts on Esther as we finished up tonight?
So maybe the time such as this was actually foretold in Deuteronomy as opposed to the actual current time.
Possible. And we know it's all one story. We know it's all one story. You know. For me, I think as we look through this, the fact that we can see Christ in it that we can see like the foreshadowings of Jesus, especially since Jesus tells us all this stuff declares me, that we can look back and actually see him in the midst of all this. Like the story of redemption, the story of suffering, the story of almost like resurrection, because Mordecai was as good as dead, and now he's exalted literally to the right hand of the king. You know, like we see all this stuff. It's just amazing to me, you know, because nobody could write that on their own and it all connect like that. There's no way. There's no way. So any other thoughts tonight? We're going to be done a little early, but just that good, huh? Left everybody speechless. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. That's what's the old saying that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. You know, I mean, that's the part of Haman thinking that it was going to be him that was honored, I think is the funniest thing in the whole story. That he's like, you should give him this and this and this and this, and he's like, okay, go give him that. You know, and it's just like, what? But anybody else? Okay, so where do we go next? Any thoughts? Go to Ruth. Ruth's a good story too. All right, so Ruth next week. Okay, Ruth chapter 1 next week. All right. Any other comments, complaints, or questions before we call tonight? So I'm going to let y'all get home in time for dinner. Okay, Laura's asking for prayer online. Okay. Anybody else?
Finley, that's why I had to leave. Memphis slammed her hand in the door, and Whitney called, and it was broken. Went to the ER, and I guess they found her shell reactive, and they're putting ice on it, and she can move her fingers and stuff, so.
That's good. Remember Finley this evening, her little hand. Anybody else? All hearts and minds clear? All right, guys, let's stand together and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Darren, you close us out.